Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have Mitzi Puentes with DFPS. She's going to be talking to us about ARD meetings and 504. This is recorded, so we're able to share this with individuals who are not able to attend today with us. For those who are from Brush Country CASA, I will be entering your continuing education for you in Optima. For those who are here with us who are not part of Brush Country CASA, you would want to get with your team about uploading those hours for you. Or you could also upload them yourself in Optima if you're able to do that. So Mitzi, if you want to get started.
Yes, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mitzi Puentes. I'm the Region 11 Education Specialist for CPS. So my role with the department is basically everything and anything education related. Whenever one of our caseworkers has issues with enrollment, with ARD meetings, 504, evaluations, even just reviewing any type of special education paperwork, they pretty much go through me. So I cover the Corpus area, the Rio Grande Valley, and the Laredo area as well. So out of all of Region 11. So it is pretty big and it is a lot of kids. So they definitely keep me busy. But really my role is to assist anyone that has a case open in Region 11 with anything that has to do with education. So I know CASA wanted me to go over special education and 504. So I will start with saying that they are two different things. I know that a lot of CPS caseworkers aren't fully kind of educated on the differences, and I try my best to do like yearly reviews and provide them the information, but I know that a lot of the times not everyone can attend. Sometimes there's a lot of turnover, so a lot of the information might be missed. But what you do need to know is that for special education, there has to be a full individual evaluation to be completed, and there is a specific timeline. I do have a PowerPoint and it is pretty lengthy, and I know I only have till 1:30, so I'm not going to go through it all in detail, but I will share it with you all. And if you want to give me a call, reach out, because if you have any questions or case related question, you're more than welcome to. That's why I'm here. And so once an evaluation is completed, they come together and they do an ARD meeting. So a lot of the times I get caseworkers reach out and say, hey, a judge court ordered an ARD. And so I always tell them, what do you mean they court ordered an ARD? You can't court order a school to just complete an ARD, because when an evaluation starts for special education, the school has 45 school days by law to complete the evaluation, then hold the ARD, and they have 30 days after that, school days, to complete that ARD. So a lot of the times, again, our judges aren't always, again, fully educated on that. Okay, I got it. All right. I was reading the comment. So just so you guys know, ARDs are held annually. Once a child is in special education, they will do every year annual ARDs. Our children are very highly mobile. We do know that. So just to keep that in mind is that if they do move to another school, a transfer ARD should be completed within 20 days. And 20 days from the time the school is notified. So that's very important that that CPS caseworker keeps their educational portfolio, that green binder, full with their records, so that it can properly be passed to the next school. And I've seen some kids be really, really, really mobile, but thankfully there's some really good CPS staff that really do keep track of their records, and that really helps when they're transferring over to a new district, a new area. And that new district will have to conduct the transfer ARD, and that does not replace the annual ARD. They'll still have to do that annual meeting with everyone involved. A lot of the time, schools aren't aware that a CASA is assigned. So if you ever run into any issues with reaching out to the counselor, the principal, they're not being responsive, we do have district foster care liaisons, and every school district in the state of Texas has one assigned. I will say that I have some good working relationships with certain districts, just because they're probably districts I work with the most and the ones that reach out to me the most. So do know that that could be a good resource for you all as well if you ever run into any issues and need a point of contact for that. So let me share my screen here. Here you go.
And while you're doing that, Mitzi, I just want to mention to everyone, if y'all have any questions, feel free to ask them at any time. You can also feel free to add them in the chat, and I'll be able to read them out aloud to Mitzi for her to answer for you.
Alrighty, so I did include here some common acronyms that we use with special education. So an ARD is an admission, review, and dismissal. And so that means that every time they do review an ARD, like every year, they can dismiss a child from special education, or they can dismiss a specific portion of their IEP, individualized educational program or plan. So basically that means that if a child, for example, no longer meets criteria for speech, then they can dismiss that portion. Or if that was the only category that they qualify for special education, they can exit our children out of special education. They do have to do some retesting and just making sure that they no longer qualify for the service before they can be dismissed. So I have seen a few kids exit out of the program just because they no longer qualified. Maybe they did when they were younger and they just no longer meet the criteria. Behavioral intervention plan, those plans are put in place when there's behavioral concerns. So they will have a plan and an actual goals for the target behaviors that they're trying to work with. FBA is a functional behavioral assessment. Those are conducted to help create the behavioral intervention plan, and those are more in detail and only focus on behavior. Full individual evaluation, like I mentioned, those are the ones that we need to have requested and completed for an ARD to actually happen. Individualized education program or plan, we call them IEPs. Those are the ones that we review in the ARD. We go over goals, accommodations. This IEP is basically the plan that the school has to follow. So whenever there's always some questions regarding transportation or speech services, that plan's going to tell you this child gets speech once a week or once every 3 weeks, or this child qualifies for special education, transportation. And these are basically the criteria or the things that we're going to implement for the plan to be working. Least restricted environment, LRE, that just means that that specific type of school placement is the least restricted environment. So the school will always try their least restrictive and then increase the restriction. And for example, a child who needs to be in a special education unit, they'll have to explain in that ARD meeting why they cannot be in a general education classroom. And then a review of existing evaluation data, a READ. So that FIE has to be reviewed every 3 years. We have run into issues with some of our foster kids where the READ isn't completed on time because they're like in the middle of a transition. So best practice is just to provide the school with any updates that maybe happened at the previous district so that new district can kind of pick up where they left off, which again can be a little bit difficult. These are the disability categories, and I'm not going to go into all of them, but the main ones that I see in our foster children are emotional disturbance and other health impairment, and they'll include ADHD. So if they have an ADHD diagnosis, it doesn't mean that they should be in special education. It just means they can qualify if they get an individual evaluation and, you know, they qualify for the service.
We have a few questions, Mitzi. The first one is, can you please explain what a surrogate parent is?
Yes, surrogate parent. I think I have a little slide on that. Let me see. Here it is. So when a child is in an RTC, a group home where there is no specific just one foster parent, and it is a little confusing because I myself still get confused sometimes. A surrogate parent has to be assigned for these children because neither ourselves as DFPS or that child placing agency case manager can make special education decisions. Why? It's the way special education laws are written, and that's why we need a surrogate assigned. For the most part, residential treatment centers are really good because they have so many kids coming in all the time, and districts are usually used to assigning a surrogate parent. Now, there's some districts that aren't very familiar, and I say we, like I myself sometimes have to step in and be like, hey, we need a surrogate assigned in order for special education decisions to be made. Now, a perfect example is children on child watch. when a child's in a child watch and they're under special education, they have to have a surrogate assigned. They don't have a foster parent, and that DFPS caseworker, they can be the education decision makers and make day-to-day decisions, but they cannot be making special education decisions. And so this slide kind of talks a little bit about that. And the LEA is the local education agency. So basically the school district has to assign one within 30 days. And it says there a judge may appoint one. So this is where CASA comes in. Now, just recently, I had a case where I was like, well, we can assign CASA, but they cannot be a CASA employee, like they receive a paycheck from CASA, if that makes sense. They have to be a CASA volunteer. So we ran into that issue, and thankfully, the district was able to find a volunteer and get one assigned. Really, surrogate parents are usually like retired teachers that the district finds, people that maybe used to work for their agency, but they no longer do, and they can't be either a DFPS staff or a child placement agency staff. We can be backup decision makers, again, for day-to-day, picking up, dropping off, obtaining records, things like that. But when it comes to special education, it's very specific as to who can be one. So, and it says right here, who is not eligible, all state employees, for example, any employee of TEA, the LEA, which is the district, or any other agency involved in the care or education of the child, such as DFPS, the juvenile department. So, for example, probation officer could not do that. Or a residential treatment center. In that case, any type of case managers from those facilities. And again, that's because those facilities usually have shift rotation. So you're not always going to have that one person watching or taking care of the kids versus a foster parent. If you're not sure if a child needs a surrogate parent, you can always reach out to myself and I can communicate with the district. Usually I'll have to communicate with a special education director because they're usually the ones who do the training and assign the individuals and all that stuff. And then right here in this slide, it talks about the responsibilities of a surrogate parent. I have had cases where we have CASA volunteers and they've said, like, we do not want to be the surrogate parent. We just don't feel like we're going to advocate in their best interest, or we're just not very familiar. We just got assigned, we're not familiar with it, and that's okay. We will eventually have to find someone from the district. I actually had a child on child watch a few years back, and the local district's like, we've never trained a surrogate parent. I, as an education specialist, can train and provide a certificate for anyone who wants to be a surrogate parent. And then the district will just assign them. And for example, that child on child watch ended up getting like a parent volunteer who actually was a former foster parent. And she was a volunteer at the school district. And she said, like, I'm willing to do the training. I know that, you know, how CPS works, and I'm competent enough to advocate for the child. So she did, and that really helped us out. I don't know if you all have any more specific questions on that one. I see another question. Who is responsible for requesting an ARD? Like I had mentioned, the schools should be automatically doing a transfer ARD when the child is new to the district. Now, after that, they will do the annual ARD. So for example, we are in January. So for example, every January, if little Timmy has an annual ARD, it's going to be done before the specific date. So before January 29 of 25 is when he will have his next ARD meeting every year. It should be around the same date, sometimes a little bit before, but never past. It should never be past. The only times I've seen it go past is when they schedule it and the child gets placed out or placement change, and then the new district has to do their transfer and then do the annual. And that's just kind of the difference. I did want to talk a little bit about RTI. So RTI is a response to intervention. This is not special education. This is not 504. This is a different type of intervention before we even get to that phase. So there's sometimes some of our kids just lack a little bit of structure and they just have a lot of educational gaps. And perfect example is parents just might not have taken them to school and they went, you know, they missed 3 months, 6 months of school. Very, very common, unfortunately. So RTI is something that the schools use to basically start tracking. For example, little Timmy's a little bit behind on his reading. He's below grade level on math, but he is paying attention. He is participating. The teacher might maybe pull him into a small group. Again, they're not making any specific accommodations. They're just making minor changes within the general education classroom to see if he can catch up. And so they do have RTI meetings. They'll talk a little bit of where they're behind, what type of gaps they have, and what they're trying to kind of close that gap and get them on track. What I've seen that's been successful is when our kids stay in placement long enough. When they're in placement for not just like a semester, but a whole school year is really when you see them flourish and be successful, because their placement and they have the stability, they make this bond with their teacher, they have good friends and things like that. So that really has benefit a lot of our kids. So if you ever come across any caregivers who talk or mention RTI, like, oh, the school's doing RTI, that's just that they've already identified there's a gap and they're working on it. And it's not necessarily, they're not diagnosing, they're not evaluating, they're just gathering data. Now, if they see that they're not advancing through the tiers, because they do like a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, kind of like a step program. If they feel they're still not there, they maybe identify, man, their ADHD is really impacting your learning, or I notice their speech is not well. Like, I don't think the interventions that we're doing here is gonna close that gap and help them stay on track. Then they themselves can do a request for an evaluation for special education. It doesn't always have to come from us. Sometimes it does come from the school. Any questions on special education? Let me see. I did put here a list of when we need to request an additional ARD. So here it would be like if there's a new diagnosis, or maybe we got an updated psychological and we saw that there's a recommendation and there's additional information that we didn't have before. If we need to change anything in the IEP, perfect example is like the speech services. Maybe we no longer need them. Maybe they're being successfully they successfully completed occupational therapy. Now they can write better, physical therapy, whatever it is. We can always request an additional ARD. All of our caregivers have the right to request an additional ARD, and they have to schedule one. Very important. Schools will give you 5 days notice for an ARD meeting. Just because they give you 5-day notice doesn't mean you have to agree to that date. You can say, hey, like foster parents have the right to say, hey, you know what, that doesn't work for me. I'm working. I can do this time, this date. They need to really speak up for themselves. What I've seen in the past, and it's very common, unfortunately, they call a foster mom, especially a foster parent that's been doing it for years. They already have like some type of working relationship. Call them up and like, hey, we already have the ARD committee here, and can we proceed and you can participate over the phone. A lot of foster parents say yes, because I've been like, the workers calling me like, Mitzi, it's gonna start in the next 30 minutes, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm available, let me jump on. And it's like a last minute ARD, maybe because they're trying to meet that 1-year timeline that they have and all that stuff. And then I feel sometimes the foster parents aren't ready. They're not equipped. Maybe they needed more time to review the IEP, and they just agreed to whatever in the moment. Thankfully, for the most part, schools really do a good job in trying to keep track of it. But there's times where the foster parents can say, you know what, I want to wait. It's last minute. I want to be able to participate and give it my full attention. I want you to send me, the IEP, the draft, because they always have the draft ready. I don't know if you ever participated in ARD, but the ARD usually, it has like a process to it, and they already have their goals typed in and their assessment and what they're going to talk about. It's a whole agenda. So foster parents do have the right to maybe review the goals, the accommodations beforehand, and then give their input if they want. If they want to just go through it like we usually do in an ARD meeting and just wait to see what comes up during that meeting and then give an input, they can totally do that as well. But just to let you all know that, let your foster parents know, you have the right to say, hey, this date doesn't work for me. They have to work around your schedule. And they also have to do the ARD in the language that you speak. So if you have a Spanish speaking caregiver, foster parent, the meeting has to be held in that language so that they can properly understand what is being discussed in the meeting. Alrighty, let me see. I'm gonna skip through this and go through.
Steve, for some of our newer volunteers, what would an ARD meeting look like? Who attends these meetings?
So yes, I actually have a list of this. Hold on, let me see. So the ARD committee, it'll include your parent, because sometimes we have kids who we've reunified with parents and we are still like on a return and monitor. So they become decision makers at that point. So it could be a parent, foster parent, a kinship caregiver, again, or a surrogate parent in specific cases. You should have a general education teacher, the special education teacher, a representative of the school. This is usually like as assistant principal, art facilitator, special education director. A lot of districts just use different people, but basically an administrator, and a person who can interpret the evaluation results. So if there was a speech evaluation, then your speech therapist should be the one to be reviewing that evaluation. If there was occupational or physical, that specific individual who completed it should. Most of the time, it'll be your diagnostician because they are the ones who do a lot of the testing with the kids. Sometimes we'll include the child. For high school, they usually will have the career and technology education. Sometimes they will have they call them transition coordinators, but usually they are like Texas workforce for the high school students to provide resource. If that district has someone available for that, they don't always attend. Let me see. I think that's pretty much it. It just depends on the child. Everyone's going to have a different type of committee. Of course, CPS, if my workers send me the invite with enough notice and I have availability in my calendar, then I will participate. How do we ensure children are receiving the accommodations agreed on? Okay, so when it comes to accommodations, that would be extra time, sitting next to the teacher. It could be reminders to stay on task. All of that, really, you have to communicate with the child. So tell me, are you sitting next to the teacher? When you took that test, did you have extra time to complete it? When you took your STAR, did they give you headphones so that you can hear the questions? Maybe they have the speech to text. Were you able to talk and then the computer would text out the words and sentences? A lot of that is just communicating with the child. They do have to do progress reports on the IEPs, and that will be because they need to monitor their progress. Timmy's speech is going well, the counseling, what their goals are and what that progress looks like. Are they meeting the goals? Are we going to have to come back to an ARD to change any of the goals? Things like that. As far as accommodations, every school teacher should be giving a copy of the plan for the child. So for example, I just had a meeting not too long ago here in locally, and I was able to talk to the child before we had the meeting, and she did say like, oh yeah, they gave me the headphones, but I still like I didn't understand the questions. She did have an intellectual disability, so it was unfortunately like I knew she was not going to understand the material even though it was modified and simplified. So really it's just communicating with the child and asking about those accommodations. Are they working for them? Are they not? If they feel they need more support and we notice that their grades are low, when we talk to them, they're still not reading. Really, it takes a lot of monitoring from that caregiver, foster parent in the home to say, you know what, I've noticed improvement. They're doing well. The accommodations are helping, or no, the accommodations aren't helping. We might need to come back to a meeting and talk about it. We don't always have to come back to an ARD meeting. We can just request like a conference with the teacher, like, hey, you know, this is what's going on. It's not working well. What can we do? With high school students or the older youth, I do notice that they can refuse some of the services. an example could be like they might have inclusion where a teacher comes in and helps them with assignments, and the student's like, no, I don't want a teacher. For the most part, in communicating, working with the districts, what they do is they'll have a teacher aide come in and basically like kind of pretend to help all the kids, because we don't want to identify who is the one in need of inclusion. And so they'll kind of put specific individuals in a classroom. Like if they're in a resource classroom, there might be more than one child needing the service. I just went to a high school where all of the core classes, the resource classes, are in the same hallway. So the kids don't know that they're all kind of receiving the same services in some way, the same type of instruction. But that's just, it just varies by the district. I hope that kind of answers that question. So let me go into
I had a question.
yes.
Jen. Hi, my name is Sandra Barrera, and I'm a CASA advocate.
Mhm.
And I just had a question. If a child, I'm advocating for a 3-year-old, never been to school. One, because she does have some challenges like speech, and she wasn't like to go to school. She wasn't potty trained or anything. So she's already potty trained, going to the potty, everything, tells you when she wants to go. Uh, so when she's ready, but she is in foster care right now. If they were decide that she could go to school, but I know it's already like January going into February, but for the new year for the school, does this services that she's getting now, like occupational physical therapy, play therapy, that's your program, that does it follow her to the school, or does she get those services that she would go to pre-K 3, pre-K 4?
Is she getting the service through the district, or is she getting it through an outside provider?
Well, through the CPS,
Like through
the
like a
correct
doctor
uniform?
referral, and they're going to an actual speech therapy place.
Yes, she does.
Okay,
Yes.
so those are two different things. The
Okay.
services that you get, that our kids get
She's
outside in the
receiving it.
community. Mhm.
Yeah, she's receiving it through an organization. She's not receiving it through the school district.
Yes.
Right, because she's not in school.
Right. So what we can do before she starts school is we can reach out to the local school district where she will be going to school, and they can actually do or request an evaluation even before she starts school, so
Yeah,
that
because I
an
did.
IEP can be in place for when she
Yes.
does start pre-K.
Yeah, I did see that the age that you had there was 3, and I know you did, and I did listen when you said that the assessment needs to be done ahead of time to put her in the appropriate. So no,
Correct.
that was just my question. Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. So just to add on to that, the sooner a request for an evaluation is made is better, just because they do by law have the 45 school days. Some schools are busier than others, bigger, so they will meet the timeline, but some might take a little less because they have less students to evaluate, and some might take a little longer if they're just a larger school district. But for the most part, if they're receiving any outside services, they can still receive school services. They're two different things. It won't affect their Medicaid or insurance or anything like that. Really, if they are receiving any type of OT/PT speech outside, we should be requesting an evaluation for the school in case there's any type of accommodations that they might need. So going into 504 really quick. So 504, like I said, 504 special ed, two different things. I sometimes get after my staff when they tell me, oh yeah, they're in like 504 special ed. Like, no. They're either in one or they're in the other. So for a 504 plan, that's what they call them, the child must have a physical mental impairment that limits one or more major life activities, have record of an impairment, and be regarded as having that impairment. So here is the definition. And basically, the physical or mental impairment is limits their like daily activities such as running, maybe they have like ADHD, things that would fall under mental impairment. So I'm going to give you a perfect example. I had this case. I was a conservatorship caseworker before I became the education specialist. So I had a child. He had severe burns from an accident he had, and that's why he was in care. And then he needed assistance in having his backpack carried because he could not carry it on his shoulders because of the burns. And so his 504 plan really was not because it was impeding his learning. The plan was to help him just get to class. And so what the plan had was they would assign a buddy and the buddy would carry his backpack. Later, he didn't want the buddy anymore. We went back we talked to the school and they allowed, at that time, they weren't allowing the rolling backpacks. They did make an exception for him and he was able to have a rolling backpack. But again, that's just an example of maybe a situation where a child might need it. I've had children have 504 plans for ADHD, but just because they need specific accommodations like sitting closer to the teacher, extra time for assignments, the impairment, I don't want to call it impairment, but that diagnosis is affecting their learning, but not to an extent to where they need to be in special education or have that coding. So this is a list of major activities under the 504 that if it's affecting any of this, then they might qualify for a 504 plan. Here it has who should attend the 504 meeting. And so it usually is a 504 coordinator, a counselor, assistant principal. Of course, you'll have your teachers, usually the general education teachers, because our 504 plans are for students who are in a general education setting. They don't have resource, they don't have special education, they don't get speech at school, they don't get OT, PT. This plan is just to make in general education classroom accommodations. That's really the difference. Our kids who are diabetic, they might have a plan because the plan might require them for to leave to the nurse's office for medication, or leave to the nurse's office when their sugar's low, check their sugar, maybe get a snack from there. There really is just kind of, it's very different. A child who's diabetic is not going to need a special education plan. They just need some type of accommodation. I've had kids get accommodations for going to the bathroom frequently because maybe they have some type of problem with that. I've had other students have this for behavioral reasons, kind of for that specific case, it was kind of like they had ADHD, but there was also like some type of behavioral concern. So they had accommodations for him in the general education classroom. At any point, even if they have a 504 plan, if anything changes, we identify more concerns, we can always request a special education evaluation. So I included here the differences between accommodations and modifications. And so accommodations is how something is taught, and modification is what is being taught or expected. And so the example for accommodations is large print, extra time to complete assignments. And this is usually in the IEP or the 504. And then for modification, examples would be eliminating choices or tests given a speech instead of a written book report. And then students with an IEP can have modified assignments or curriculum, and students in 504 as well. So again, it just depends on the child, their specific plan, and how their needs need to be met. Any questions?
Would every child who qualifies for an ARD meeting also be receiving 504 accommodations automatically, or?
No, like I mentioned, there are two different things. A special education, there are accommodations very similar to the 504, but they cannot have, and this kind of slide kind of goes over it, a student will not receive special education and have a 504 plan at the same time. they'll be different. What happens a lot of the time, and I know with CPS staff, is like, well, they get 504 accommodations, and I'm like, okay, do they have an IEP? And if the caseworker says yes, I'm like, okay, they are receiving accommodations, but they're not 504. They're receiving special education accommodations. So it's just the language is sometimes misinterpreted and misused. And so that's where some of the confusion is. And so I did put here like CPS representation is needed at ARDs sometimes, especially for like my adoption caseworkers. They always just seem to be traveling and placing and going everywhere. And so I tell them, if you can't attend, send me the invite, and if I'm available, I will attend and take notes. So my role in that meeting is to make sure the meeting goes as this should be. If we have any concerns or questions we need to ask, that we do it at that point. And then I take notes for the caseworker, and I will document it for them in our system, just so that, you know, they can kind of be aware of what was talked about in the meeting and who participated. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I can also help requesting records. Sometimes when our kids are very new to foster care, we have no records. We might only know where they last went to school with. So a lot of the times I do have removing staff that will reach out and be like, hey, Mitzi, like this child is new. Mom did say they were in special ed, but I don't know what services they were receiving. And so I usually will reach out to school of origin if the caseworker requests and get that information for them. So that's kind of how I can assist in that way as well. Any other questions? And I just skimmed through my PowerPoint, but I am going to share it with you guys. I'll send it to you, Jennifer, and then and Brenda, and then y'all can share it to all of your CASA staff. I am available for any types of school-related questions, presentations. Really, that is my role. I do presentations with our districts, and I do try my best to educate them on CPS, why we have CASA sometimes, why we don't, why we need to be involved in the ARD meetings, or why you should be contacting us if there's any type of concerns with a foster parent. And so I have gone out to like Gregory Portland, CCISD, a lot of really districts in my region, to where I just kind of present, and usually I present on the timelines, because a lot of the time schools aren't even aware of what a legal timeline looks like, of why a judge is ordering a specific thing, or why the kids were sent back with mom. And so a lot of it is like educating our educators on how we work and how we can work together. Because that's usually how we can help our kids, when we kind of unite.
Mitzi, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you give an example of bullet number 6?
1, 2, 3. Yes, during ARD meetings, the parent is the one with the vote. Is that the one?
Yes.
So for during ARD meetings, CPS, we can say our concerns and what we would like to see and recommend, but really the parent, that foster parent, surrogate parent, the kinship caregiver, they are the ones to make special education decisions. So they are the ones that have to agree or disagree with that ARD meeting. It really is up to them. It kind of goes back to that question regarding the surrogate parent, how we as DFPS cannot make special education decisions. That's why, because of that law, because we can, and a lot of the time schools are really good about taking our feedback. If I go in and give them an update of what's going on and what's going on with the child and the changes in our concerns, they will address them. They're not going to ignore us. But when it comes to actually signing and voting, like, do you agree? And of course, they always say, everyone agree in the committee, and we will all say yes. It's very rare where I see a school say like, oh, we're not going to take CPS concerns into consideration to this ARD. Most of the time they will. I've only had like 1 or 2, but very rare. And that's why I put that in there, just because some of my CPS staff say, well, I was in an agreement to the foster parent agreeing to that. And I was like, okay, we can talk about the concern, but we also need to be bringing it up before or during the meeting, before we make that final, basically yes, like yay or nay. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have any other questions for Mitzi today? Like she mentioned, she'll be sharing that PowerPoint with me, and I'll be sure to send it out to everyone who's attending today, along with those who are watching the recording. But if we
Yes,
don't, go ahead, I'm so sorry.
Mitzi, will you be able to provide your contact or your email information for the volunteers? Or are you okay with us sharing it? Just
yes, so my contact information is on the last
coming up,
slide.
and then
It's on the screen.
Of the PowerPoint, but it will be like on my email as well. I am a teleworker, so if you ever run into a school meeting and you need me to participate in person, just let me know with enough time so that I can make travel accommodations. Like I am in the Edinburgh area, so I do have to travel an hour or two north to get to Corpus and things like that. But if I have enough time, I will make myself available to participate to any in-person meetings. I've had some CPS staff that say, you know what, I think your presence is more effective in person because I've been having issues with the school and they're not being receptive or whatever. And so if you ever need like a DFPS staff to go there, the caseworker's not available, as long as I'm having enough notice and I don't have another ARD scheduled at that time, I will make myself available to assist you guys. So yeah, you can reach out to me directly. You don't have to reach out to me through the caseworker. A lot of the times the foster parents sometimes will call me directly if they have any questions.
Okay, well, if we don't have any other questions, if you do, please raise your hand so we don't forget to allow you to ask your question before Mitzi leaves us today. I think Miss Sandra, you might have a question.
No, I just wanted to tell her thank you for this great presentation for us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again. Anything, everything, education, I'm here to help.
Awesome. Well, I thank you, Mitzi, for being able to be here with us and sharing all of your knowledge about 504s and ARDs. As I mentioned before, this is recorded. For those who are attending, I'll be adding your continuing education into Optima for you. If you're not part of First Country CASA, you're going to want to get with your team about getting that information added in Optima for you. For those who are watching the recording, if you are not able to enter your information yourself, be sure to get with me and I can definitely help you do that. But again,
Okay.
Mitzi, thank you for joining us and we hope that everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Just menos yo voy y les digo.